must warn you, the story you're about to hear is not the glorious tale of kings and queens you were taught in school. This is something darker, something hidden. It is the story of a scandal buried in the shadows of England's monarchy, a tale so shocking that it was almost erased from history. Imagine a cold, echoing castle where ambition outweighed love and secrets replaced truth. At the center of it all stood a king, a man so desperate for power and control that he bound a child only 6 years old to his throne in the name of marriage, not for love, not for family, but for power, for politics, for possession. Stay with me, because once you hear this, you will never look at royal history the same way again. The Middle Ages in England were not golden halls of romance, as so many legends make us believe. They were dangerous corridors of power, filled with political games, secret negotiations, broken oaths, and desperate attempts to secure fragile dynasties. Every move at court was a calculation, every smile could hide a dagger, and every marriage was a weapon. Kings and queens did not marry for love. They married for survival, for bloodlines that could strengthen their claims, for land that could expand their reach, and for alliances that could keep their enemies at bay. But beneath the glittering crowns and jeweled robes, this system was brutally cold. It demanded sacrifices, and the ones who suffered most were rarely the kings themselves. In this ruthless game stood one forgotten figure, a little girl, barely 6 years old, a child far too small for the weight of a crown. Yet she was chosen, not for who she was, but for what her tiny existence could buy. A royal bargain, sealed with her innocence. Her name would almost be lost to time, but her story would whisper from the shadows, a reminder of how far ambition could reach and how cruel history could be to the powerless. Her name, so often erased from the chronicles, belonged to a child who had no voice in her own destiny. She was not a queen, not yet even a woman, but a little girl, only 6 years old, pulled from the innocence of childhood and placed into the cold theater of power. On the day she was brought before the court, her frame was swallowed by garments that dragged across the floor, velvet and silk meant to signify majesty, but far too heavy for her trembling shoulders. She did not understand the Latin vows whispered around her, nor the solemn faces of men who nodded as her fate was sealed. To the nobles, she was not a daughter or a child. She was parchment come alive, a contract with a beating heart, a fragile bridge tying one royal house to another. Her tiny hands clutching at the folds of fabric meant nothing to the assembly. What mattered was the bloodline she carried, the alliances she secured, and the ambitions she unknowingly served. And to the king, her so-called husband, she was not a bride, not a partner, not even a person. She was a tool, a possession, a symbol of power he could display, but never love. History would rarely speak her name, but in that moment she became both the victim of an empire's greed and the ghost of a childhood stolen forever. The king at the heart of this scandal was not the picture of confidence you might imagine. Behind his crown, he was a man plagued by dread, the dread of betrayal, of whispers echoing through stone corridors, and the ever-present fear that his throne, so carefully taken, could be stolen in the blink of an eye. Every glance from his nobles felt like a threat. Every rumor of rebellion seemed like a spark that could ignite the kingdom. He feared foreign invaders, yes, but he feared his own bloodlines even more. Rival houses circled like wolves, waiting for the chance to strike. So the king devised a plan, a marriage not of love, but of calculation. By binding a child to his dynasty, he believed he could chain loyalty, turn rivals into subjects, and bend an entire lineage beneath his will. Draped in velvet robes that shimmered beneath the flicker of torches, he stood tall in the grand hall, projecting strength he did not truly possess. And beside him, silent, fragile, stood the girl. Her gown weighed heavier than her body, her tiny fingers clutching a doll hidden within her sleeve, a secret piece of the childhood already slipping away. The official records speak politely of alliances, but forgotten manuscripts tell the truth. They describe a moment too cruel, too cold, too shameful for England's monarchy to ever proudly remember. What became of the little girl? She lived within walls that were gilded, yet suffocating. A castle that glittered like a palace, but pressed down on her like a prison. The echo of footsteps followed her through every corridor, reminding her that nothing she did was truly her own. Her childhood toys were taken away, replaced with scrolls, lessons, and expectations. The soft giggles of play turned into the heavy silence of duty. Every smile she gave was measured, every word rehearsed, until the child within her seemed to disappear. The court called it preparation. They told themselves they were shaping a queen, but in truth, they were crushing a child beneath centuries of tradition and fear. The silk gowns draped over her frame looked magnificent from afar, but to her they were chains, symbols of a future she never asked for, a crown pressed upon her long before she could even understand its weight. And while the nobles feasted, drinking to the success of this union, the whispers outside told a different story. The common people murmured of corruption, of power gained at the cost of innocence. They spoke of a monarchy not built on honor, but on shadows and secrets. And in those whispers lived a truth the court desperately tried to bury. For the king, this scandal was never about companionship or even about the girl herself. It was about survival. Every rival who watched his throne with hungry eyes, every rebellion that stirred in the countryside, every whisper of betrayal within his own court, they all gnawed at him like shadows in the night. To him, the child was not a bride. She was a living shield, a pawn he could move across the board of power. By binding her to his crown, he believed he could bind her family's loyalty, securing one more piece in a game where one wrong move meant ruin. But power built on cruelty is fragile. It is like glass, gleaming in the light, but always ready to crack. And the weight of fear only made those cracks spread further. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into rumors, and soon the court itself began to question what had been done. Because secrets, no matter how deeply buried, always have a way of clawing their way into the light. Rumors began to ripple across Europe's royal courts, carried on the tongues of envoys, merchants, and spies. At banquets in France, whispers floated between goblets of wine. In the halls of Spain, courtiers exchanged knowing glances, and in the Italian states, scribes penned notes laced with ridicule. Diplomats spoke of the marriage with disgust, some with mockery, and some even with laughter. What kind of king, they asked, would bind his throne to a child? The question was repeated so often it became a jest, a bitter tale retold in every corner of the continent. But beneath their mocking words lay something darker, fear. Because if England's king was bold enough, desperate enough to wed a child, what other lines would he be willing to cross? What other acts might he commit to hold on to his crown? The scandal, once a hidden shame behind palace walls, now became a weapon sharpened by enemies. Each rumor was an arrow aimed at England's throne, each laugh a spark threatening to ignite rebellion. And for the first time, the king realized that the story he had tried to bury was no longer his secret to control. In time, the girl grew older, her childhood swallowed by the crown she never asked to wear. Chroniclers of the age tried to polish her memory, calling her a queen of grace, of patience, of quiet dignity. But beneath those words lies a harsher truth, one they could never quite erase. Her childhood had been stolen before it even began, her laughter replaced with duty, her innocence chained to a man decades her senior, a king clinging desperately to control. And though centuries have passed, the scars of that union still whisper through the pages of history. Today, her name is barely remembered, smothered under royal propaganda and the triumphs of kings. Yet the shadow of her stolen youth lingers, a ghost at the edge of England's legacy, a reminder that behind every gilded throne may lie a story of silence, suffering, and sacrifice. So I leave you with this. When we admire the crowns, the castles, and the shining portraits of kings, we must remind ourselves that behind all the glory lies a darker truth. Every polished throne, every jewel on a crown carries with it a price, often paid by those too young, too powerless to resist. Her story is not simply a forgotten tale of the past. It is a reminder that power has always demanded sacrifices and that innocence has too often been its currency. And I must ask you, if such cruelty could be carried out openly in the courts of England, witnessed by nobles and scribes, then what other scandals, what other secrets might still remain hidden in the shadows, waiting for the day history finally dares to reveal them?